morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this Symetrix webinar for ARC controllers. I'm the host, Stu Paterson, and we'll be talking today about our entire line of ARC controls, physical ARC controls. And I'll show you just our quick lineup here and what they are. Why do we call them ARCs to begin with? So we call them ARCs because ARC stands for Adaptive Remote Control. We also have an analog control at the end on the far right, so I'll go through them from left to right. On the far left is our ARC3, our flagship unit, as it were. Next to that, to the right, is our ARC2E, and then the SW4, and then the K1E. And then we have our expander, our EX4E, which integrates with either the SW4 or the K1E. And last but certainly not least, the analog control, the RC3 on the far right. All right, and that's our list right there. Now, what are our controllers? Well, our controls, they effectively control parameters within Composer and thus the DSP based on controller IDs. As you can see in this example, we have the mute function set to a controller ID of 2 and the fader set to a controller ID of 1. That is how it communicates. That is how our ARC controls, with the exception of the RC3, communicate with the programming and make our selections. So we're going to talk about the flagship first, the ARC3. And the reason being is because since it's our most complex, a lot of the functionality is either we take away from functionality as we go down in our line of controllers. I don't want to say that they're less powerful, but since the ARC3 gives you the most functionality, we'll start with that and then move on down with less complex devices. So as you see here, this is our ARC3, misspelled at the top, AR3. That is not correct. So we have 3 colors available, silver, white, and black. And the ARC3 can display up to 32 menus, each with 32 individual items to control functions such as volume, preset and source selection, or as it states, complex logic-based events like room combining, which is a completely separate webinar. Now, how you assign a parameter to the ARC3 is very simple. It's not like our DSPs. Of course, you have to have our DSPs within your site file to control, and all of our ARCs are attached to the DSP via the ARC port on the backs of our units, which is separate from Ethernet or Dante. It's its own complete system, integrated system. So there, as you can see here on our example, the gain module, on the gain module, you right-click on the parameter, in this case, the fader. Let's pretend it's the master. You right-click and press Set Up to Remote Control. Now, when you do that, the Setup to Remote Control window pops up, and you need to scroll all the way to the right, if you haven't already, to add a new ARC. And that is what you see here in the example. Okay, and once you've done that, the new window pops up on the RS-45 remote control, and RS-45 is just our ARC network that we utilize. And you need to take or choose your ARC from the drop-down menu. In this case, it's the ARC3, which thankfully is the top selection. So once we, or next to top selection, I should say. And then once you've had that selected, you can go ahead and choose the new ARC. Okay, and once it's been added, I'll go ahead and show you in just a second. So right here on the right-hand side, that's a snippet of Remote Control Manager. And this is what you're going to see in Remote Control Manager on the ARC tab once that parameter has been assigned. And you'll see on the left, it has been assigned And it also now has pulled a remote control number. And you can see within the list on the right-hand side in Remote Control Manager that is now stating the ARC3 address 1 has remote control number 1 as the master fader, as we've programmed. Now, what else you can do with this guy? Hold on one second. Let's back up a bit. Sorry, got ahead of myself. All right, so now you can open up that tab to change parameters of that ARC once you've now created that ARC3. And you'll notice that on the right, we have the Edit ARC3 panel, and we have many parameters that we can set here. Okay, not discluding, of course, at the very top, we have the description, as you see here on the left. So you can change the description in many ways. So once you click on that area or click on the A right there, which will open the image menu to edit the description, you can type a descriptive name for the ARC3. You can choose a display font for the ARC3 description and decrease or increase font size as desired for the ARC3 description. You can use the up, down, left, right, and reset buttons to adjust the placement of the description on the display. And that's literal, as in you can change the orientation. Like if you're a few pixels, you want it to be near the top or the bottom, you can do that. Reset will bring the description back to its default position of 0, 0. Holding down Control by pressing one of the 4 placement buttons will increase the position in increments of 4. Now, background images of 239 by 24 pixels monochrome images can also be used, bitmaps. They are imported and the placement adjusted from this window. You can select OK when you're finished. Now, every RS-45 ARC device must have a unique address. The address is entered here and must match the address of the physical hardware to be programmed. Up to 99 RS-45 devices are supported per site file. The RS-45 devices may be connected to any Symetrix DSP on the common control network. The physical address of the ARC3 is set using the system menu. To enter the system menu, you press and hold all 3 buttons for 3 seconds. And then you navigate to the address field using the left or right arrows. If I remember correctly, it's directly to the left or right when you first do it, but yeah, you'll find it. There's not that many menu items to scroll through. Okay, and then you'll see here now that device has been set to address 1, the ARC3, and we now have the RS-45 address matching that ARC3. It'll now work. Okay, now you have this option here, the Dynamic ARC Enable. So the Dynamic ARC is an option, and it's unique to the ARC3s. It allows the ARC3 to be enabled or completely disabled based on the status of a control number. As in, the event schedule and composer can be used to restrict the usage of an ARC3, enabling it to be used only between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. as an example, of course. And it has to have its own unique controller ID, okay? As you can see, once it's enabled, you can change the controller ID from anything that you want from 1 to 10,000. In this example, we chose 50. Okay, now, when the controller value or when that controller number is at a value, say 65535, the ARC3 will be enabled. That controller number, I mean. When that controller number is at a value of 0, the ARC3 will be locked and disabled. So that controller ID is important. So as we can see, so generally 65535 is going to be enabled. The ARC will be enabled and used. And when the that control number shoots a value of 0, the ARC3 will be locked and disabled. Okay. Okay, to set this up in Composer, you got to bring in a one-button latch module from the toolkit in Design View. As we see here, that's you see our little toolkit zoom on the top left, and then you bring that in, and under Control Modules, Control Inputs, that is where you will find the one-button latch button. Double-click the module, and you can create two presets. One with the button saved in the on state, and one with the button saved in the off state. And you'll see on the right, those two presets have been created. Moving on. Okay, so now from the toolkit, you want to add a one output remote control number module from the control modules, control output section, and wire the one button latch module to it. Open the remote control number module, type the control number that you will be used to trigger the dynamic arc. In this case, it's 50. Remember, we set the example to 50. When preset 1 is triggered, the latch button will turn on, giving that control number a value of 65535, enabling the arc. Whoops. Right? Now, the presets, you can enable and disable the arc on a schedule using Event Scheduler. As you can see here, this is an example of our Event Scheduler, and you can set the disable and enable times for that unit. Okay. Now, the brightness. This should be pretty self-explanatory. You slide the bar to adjust the brightness of the display for each setting. You can check the auto brightness settings for ambient light box to enable the arc to automatically adjust to a room's ambient light, as you can see in that selection down below. You can also set it to brighten the LEDs when the buttons are pressed. Disabling that, there's no automatic brightening or dimming of those buttons. Okay. All right, so delay time. So this is the idle behavior. To set the idle delay time, you need to enter the amount of time between 1 and 600 seconds desired to pass before the ARC3 goes into idle mode. The default idle time is 10 seconds. And you can also set down below, you can check the show date time box, and it will display the time and date in idle mode. This time it can be displayed in 12 or 24-hour mode, and the date display format is also adjustable, as you can see. Okay, you can also set a display message when in idle mode, and you can just select the A button, as you can see right to the right of the message field, to edit the message. Much the same way as you can edit the ARC3 itself. Now, the idle message is blank by default. You need to type your own message in the text box and choose the display font and decrease or increase the font size as desired for this message. Okay, and again, you can use the up, right, left, right, and reset buttons much the same way as the actual ARC device's name. So it's pretty simple. In fact, it's identical, so we can move forward from here. All right, now sleep mode. To enable sleep mode is effectively the unit just turning off completely and not displaying that message or time as you set below or above in the idle behavior. To enable sleep mode, you check this box labeled Enable Sleep Mode, and when sleep mode is active, the ARC has a completely blank display. Now, to set the delay time, you enter the desired amount of time between 1 and 600 seconds that pass before the ARC3 goes into sleep mode. As you can see, the default is 60 seconds. You can also turn off the LEDs while in sleep mode, as indicated with that checkbox below. Okay, now wake behavior. So the proximity detector wakes and prevents idle sleep or idle or sleep mode. You check this box to enable the ARC3 to detect when someone is within close proximity. Check the revert to first menu from idle sleep box to bring the ARC3 back to the first menu when it awakes. And the first menu is set on the screen, and I'll show you that in a little bit. You also have the ability to enable security. You check the enable security box to require the entry of a 4-digit security PIN when accessing the ARC3, and then you would enter. All right, now you check this, the Allow System Diagnostics menu access box to enable access to diagnostics. All right, now previously I had stated when the revert to first menu from idle sleep, it is going to be the top menu as you can see down below. So, and you can edit this easily. So you can select the edit button and edit a highlighted menu item. Okay, and of course that menu item, you can change the, you can press the A button in order to open the settings menu for that. And as you can see, it's exactly the same as setting the font for everything else. And you can also import a image as stated above, but effectively exactly the same thing. All right. Now, you can also set the controller number field is used to set or edit the controller number that the menu will control. So you can change the controller number here to something else if you so desire. The dynamic menu enable checkbox down below is used to make the menu available, that menu item available when the dynamic menu controls number is active. To configure the dynamic menu, check this box for dynamic ARC enable, enter remote control number, and then choose the controller number from 1 to 10,000. Okay. Again, when the control number is 65535, this menu item will be available. For example, let's just say in a room combine application, the volume 1 menu can be made to appear only when in a combined state and disappear when in an uncombined state. Okay, as we can see here, we have a little combined situation or a combined example. In this, the same control number as defined in the dynamic ARC remote control number is also assigned to the combine button. Okay, when the combine button is on, the ARC3's menu, a volume 1 menu will appear. When the combine button is off or the rooms are uncombined, the menu will disappear. Okay. Now, this selection, don't accept menu changed value until menu button pressed, forces the menu button to be pressed before accepting any change made in that menu, which means you can see your selections or you can see the choices before you actually engage those choices. Okay. And then, of course, we have the wraparound menu values when highest or lowest values reached. This will enable a menu to wrap around instead of scroll. And as an example, if the menu goes from 1 to 10, after 10 is reached, the menu will wrap around to 1 instead of having to scroll all the way from 10 back to 1. Okay. Excuse me. Now, the menu types down below function in either of 2 different ways. Continuous menus acts like a fader, and enumerated menus act like a button or selector for that matter. Okay. Now, the DSP parameter value and menu value display are used to determine the actual range of the assigned fader. The menu value display is used to determine whether the value is displayed in dB increments with off when it reaches the lower limit as a percentage value or count. All right, and then of course you can set the increment and decrement. The default is 3 dB, and generally speaking, that's my go-to 3 dB because 1 dB in some cases is a little too granular. All right, so now enumerated menus. Now, the enumerated menu item windows displays the list of items or enumerations in the menu currently being edited. The new item button, the new item button adds a new item to the menu items list. The remove item button deletes the currently selected menu item, as it should. Okay. The selected item name gives the menu item a friendly or descriptive name. This name will appear on the ARC's display. To edit the item name, go to the Edit ARC3 window. Now, bear in mind that the selective item names, these are going to be on the menu, so be aware of how much room is available. So in some cases, if the name is too long, you may have to edit it for content. Okay. And then down below here, so the change order move up and down. So the selective menu item, you can change where it's oriented in the menu placement. So you can literally change, like if in this example, if I wanted to go ahead and let's go here. If you wanted to go ahead and have room combine as the first menu item, you can move that up, and then that would be the first menu item when the unit wakes up. Okay. Now, again, you can remove, simple. It just removes the menu item, and then add preset menu. This is to create a new preset menu that can be recalled from the ARC. Now, this is a little different. So what you do, as you can see here, for the presets menu name displays the preset menu name. To edit that name, you press the A button as other things, as other name fields in the rest of the ARC. So effectively, we can skip past all of this. So moving on. All right, so now it's the same thing. We have the dynamic menu enable, which functions exactly the same as with the room combine. If you enable this, you can have the preset menu either engaged or disengaged based on that dynamic menu or that controller value. And the same thing here, don't accept vet changes until the left or right button is pressed, or wraparound menu values when highest lowest values reached, exactly the same. Now, this is where you set up your preset menu. Now, by default, there's 4 presets already added to this. So when you create or when you engage the preset menu, it'll automatically fill or populate with these 4 presets. Okay. Excuse me. Now, obviously, you can change the order, as you can see down on the right-hand side. But more importantly, you can change what that menu item, it says preset number 1, but you can change which preset it actually triggers here, as well as change the name of that item. See, and you can, of course, change, I got to get rid of these things. And you can add notes to your, to this field, to the preset menu that only you can open. All right, but let's go backwards a little bit. So obviously you can add a new item. So by adding a new item, you can effectively add up to 32 presets, what can be triggered by the ARC3, as you can see in the top. And of course, you would just add it like a completely different item again, and then choose which menu or preset it triggers. All right, so now moving on. We've already talked about the dynamic menu. So as you can see here, we have the room combine, and it also changes based on what you want to see. Okay, and we've already talked about continuous menus. The continuous menus are, we can also change the restricted range. So as you can see here, you can change what the end user can effectively control with that volume. So in this case, you can get the low is -72, which is effectively off, or the high of +12, which is the highest. Now, generally, I mean, you can set the high to whatever you want, to -12, if you so decide, or to the low for that matter. If you don't want the lowest range that they're able to control to be completely off, you can change it to something like -48 if you so choose. Okay, and we talked previously about the value display range and the units that you can use. So there's dB, dB with off at minimum, percent, and count. All right, so that's in a nutshell the ARC3. Now let's talk about our ARC2E. Now the ARC2E, it's still a pretty powerful device. It can display up to 24 menus, each with up to 16 items, and can control basic audio functions as can the ARC3. Now, and setting up to remote control is exactly the same way you would set up your ARC3. You would right-click on your parameter and select the ARC2E as your device. And then once selected, it appears in the remote control manager as an ARC2E, by default, the address 1. And of course, you can change the description much like you can with the ARC3, and you can change the address. Well, the address is changed differently in the ARC2E than the ARC3. Now, on the back of these units, you have 2 dials. By default, they come from the factory. The 10s is going to be in the 0 place, and the 1s are going to be in the 1 place. And you are required to make sure that each device that you have on the network matches those addresses as set on the left. Okay, then we move on to the menus. All right, so it's effectively exactly the same as setting the menus in the ARC3, with a little bit less, obviously, of choices here or ability to change the menu. There's no dynamic menus, as you can tell. We do have the ability to set and edit the menu items, as you can see here, but we can't add different fonts. You're restricted to 1 font. You can't add images, of course, but you can also change the remote control number. And again, you can not accept change values until a menu button is pressed, and you can wrap around menu items. And then down here, this is where you can set your changes, like if you want to limit the low and limit the high controllability by the end user, as well as setting an initial value. Where does it start? Whoops. So, and then down below, you have the resolution. Now, it shows as a percentage per click. It's not decibel. So this can be quite confusing, but generally speaking, if I remember correctly, 3.571 is effectively 3 dB, but I'll have to check my math. And of course, here's your enumerated menu. Each menu item can be moved up and down. You can add an item, remove an item. You can change your item names, of course, and the item value. Okay. And then again, you can control presets much like the ARC3, and of course, change the menu name. You can accept values. Again, there's a lot of redundancy in what you can do in the controllability. And of course, the preset area, it's effectively the same as the ARC3, as we mentioned earlier, where you can change the selected menu item name as well as the preset that it triggers and change the order up and down. You can also change the menu brightness. Now, this is literally just the LED face on the unit. So it's not quite the same, because in the ARC3, it's OLED, and with the ARC2E, it is an LCD screen, effectively, or dot matrix if you want to think of it that way. All right, and then we have the inactive behavior. When the unit is not touched for 4 seconds, you can click once to reactivate, and you can change the brightness of what it, or the inactive brightness, I should say, as well as the idle behavior. It's you have 2 choices, idle when not touched for 10 seconds or 30 seconds. And again, you have the revert to first menu, and as well, you can change the display message when it's an idle. Now we're going to the SW4. So the SW4 is just a simple 4-button programmable control. They can be programmed as momentary latched radio buttons. In this example, the ARC SW4E is programmed as a preset trigger, as you can see on the right, and the LEDs of the ARC SW4E indicate which of the 4 presets are active currently, or your last selection. Now, we can create this. So it's how you do this is effectively the same as adding an ARC2 or ARC3. It's a little different, of course. So let's go ahead and start off with a 4-button radio control. It'll be in your control modules and control inputs in your toolkit. And then we'll bring in, also in the control module area and the control accessories, 2 dual preset triggers. All right. Now we want to wire, as you can see, the 4-button radio button or radio control to each of the 4 preset triggers. And then once we've done that, we want to open up each preset trigger and assign them a preset number, which we will take care of later. Now, then we can open up the radio button and rename that module. So instead of just button 1, 2, 3, 4, we can set it to which preset it's actually controlling. But now, how we select the SW4 in order to control these presets or trigger these presets. So we right-click on the fader itself, not on the buttons, but the fader. So we right-click on the fader, go to Setup to Remote Control, and this is where we scroll over to the right, and then in the drop-down list, add an ARC SW4E. And once that's done, in this case, we can just go ahead and auto-assign a next unused number if necessary. So that'll assign the controller ID to that control. So now you can see here, it shows up as a modular ARC with an address of 3 because we've already created our other devices. Now, you do have some editability, so you can change the description, but this is just a description, obviously, within Composer. And you can also change the address of the unit. And I may add the SW4E, the addresses are changed or set exactly the same way as the ARC2E. There's 2 dials on the back. So, as you can see here. Now, you also have the options auto dim after 30 seconds, and that's just the LEDs on front. Now, obviously, there's 4 LEDs that, and each, since it's a radio button, each one will indicate which current selection is active. But of course, if you set this to auto dim after 30 seconds, it will now dim, or the LED will disappear after that 30 seconds. Another thing I should mention, let's see, let's skip ahead a little bit. Yeah, so enable locking by holding knob pressed for 3 seconds. So hello? Whoops. Did I lose everybody? Check 1, 2, 3. Can I be heard? I can? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. That was weird. All right. So moving on. Okay. So let's go back to this main switch. So you have the 2 tabs, 2 main tabs, the main and the switches. So you can change the behavior of the SW4E by going to this tab. Now, you'll remember when I dragged in a control, it was a radio button control, it was a 4-button radio. So I want to change this to a radio button here. Okay, as you can see. Now, the controller number assigned to the setup was already assigned to this ARC. If you need independent switches or custom, you change everything here. You change the controller ID here. But since we're using that fader that we've already selected the control number for, we're going to utilize that. And these aren't independent or custom, but you have these changes down below. You can do a preset change mode, which is effectively just a trigger, individual trigger. You can set it to momentary switch, and then switch initially on at power up. You can do that for individual switches. Now you can also change the LED and the function of the LEDs, because there is a single LED, but it's multicolor. Multicolor is a relative term. It's either going to be green, red, or amber, depending on what you'd like it to do. And this is how you set that operation. Okay. You can also change the LED number. Now, getting on to the K1E. So the K1E is our single knob but two function device. So with the K1E, you can control two volumes. In this example, you can see channel 1 and channel 2. And you'll notice on the K1E, we have you can't see it in this photo, but we have an A and a B, which you use the actual encoder. You can push the knob in order to effectively change from A and B. And again, it is selected exactly the same way as our devices. We right click on what we want to control, set up to remote control, and then we scroll to the right and we add. There we go. So we open up add modular ARC. We change our device type to the ARC K1E down below, and then we hit OK. Now, you'll notice once you've done so, you have the two encoder areas. So the drop-down menu down below, you have the A and B, the encoder 1A and encoder 1B. These are the two sides, or the two choices that I mentioned earlier. Now, generally, you don't necessarily have to have both active. There are some installations where you just have the A side. So you can leave B disabled, but if you want to use two functions or two volumes, you would need to engage them. So again, you're going to set up. So you'll notice now we have both. We have the one is 41, and we are selecting the second to be auto assigned next used controller number as 42, so we can have both enabled. And again, so you'll see something here. So you can change the description and then the RS-45 address. And of course, right here, it's changed exactly the same as our other devices, other than the ARC3. But down below, you'll notice in the options area, so previously, you didn't have that option to enable locking by holding knob because the SW4 didn't have a knob, but this device does. So you can actually enable locking. You select this, and by pressing that for 3 seconds, it will lock the device. It won't used. You can't change any of the parameters. However, I can't tell you how many calls I've had because people forget this and say, how do you unlock this device? Well, you press and hold it for 3 seconds. So you can also enable locking with hardware lockout pinouts. All right, so moving on to the right. So we have the knobs tab where you can set the encoder behavior. So obviously we've already had the A side enabled with remote control number 41. We can also set the resolution. In this case, default is 1.190 per click. I generally increase that a little bit. And then you have an initial value, which is when it's turned on or when it power cycles, what is the initial value of that control. And again, we have the low and high value. You'll notice they're in percentages because the controller doesn't know the decibel level. It just knows its value that it's sending or pushing to the DSP from 0 to 65535. Of course, you can wrap the values and you can LEDs scale to high-low values, which is useful for those high-low values, which means either A, if you're going from 0 to 100, the LEDs will increment from fully off to fully on, or they can scale to the high-low values, which means if you set the low value to 20%, it will, instead of being 20%, the LEDs will actually indicate 0 at that point. And then you can also set the LED mode. So let's see here. I'm moving ahead of myself a bit. All right, here we go. So down below again, so the LED display mode, that's the LED bar on the face of the unit. So you can disable that LED bar. You can go one at a time, on one at a time, or you can do bar up or bar down depending on the orientation that you want it to be. Now, same thing here. So what this means that you need to press the actual encoder, which is the knob. So you're pressing the knob to confirm sending a value, which is turning the volume or turning the knob, but it won't actually stick until you press the encoder again. Now we're getting to the expander. So the expander is identical to the SW4E, and it's a great way to add usability to the SW4 and the K1E. It should be mentioned they only function with the SW4E and the K1E. And you can see here with the K1E on the left, you can add up to 4 expanders, four button expanders. With the ARC SW4E, you can only add up to 3. So a total of 4 button devices in each configuration, right? And as such, you cannot utilize the EX4E with either an ARC2E or an ARC3. Okay. Now, it's how you set this up is similar to the K1 or the XW or the SW4E with some additional menu items. So it's the same thing with this is the K1E and the X4E. So in this case, you can combine, this is a select and set option, which means you press the button to select the operation and use the knob to set it. And in this case, what you would do is you take the first fader, set up to remote control, add new ARC, but in the drop-down menu, you go down to ARC K1E plus 1 ARC EX4E. Once that's selected, you can see that you've now created a modular ARC, and you can see the picture of what you're enabling there. So, and then it'll show up as a modular ARC. So only the ARC3 and the ARC2E show up as that's what they are. That's by default the device. Everything else shows up as modular ARC. Now, of course, you can change that description as well as the RS-485 address. Now, in this case, if you take a look, we'll go to the switch area, and we're going to talk about that select and set. So we've set it to select and set, and then on the knob side, you'll notice down below, once we select that, things are grayed out. So then we go to the knob side, which is the K1E, and we go to enable, and there are the other settings. But then if you look towards below, once we select the encoder 1A switch 1, there's a drop-down list which gives us this menu to the right. So you have, instead of 2 choices, you now have 8 choices, which means 8 encoders are now available for control assignment, 4 each on the A side and 4 each on the B side, depending on the button pressed. Okay. Now, let's go back here. So I'm sorry, I moved ahead a little bit. So let's go ahead and show how you do that. So now we go back to each fader. So in this case, we're going to go to the channel 1 fader, set up remote control. We're going to choose the modular ARC that we've already created, but we're going to select encoder A switch 2, which means that's the second button. Okay. And then once we've encoded all of those, you'll notice on the left-hand side, encoder 1A has these 4 selections. So with the top button engaged, the A side is remote control number 44. With the second button engaged, and remote control number 45 is now being controlled. And much the same way you would do the B side. So now the analog control. The analog control is simply that, a analog, it's just a resistive pot. So, and this is handy for controlling a volume, a default volume. So in DSP land or in Symetrix land, any analog control takes precedence over digital. So if you have a pot, or in this case an RC3 controlling a volume, no digital control can be used to change that value within the DSP, because analog will always take precedence. So remember that when you create a pot. So how do you do it? So first off, you need to enable the potentiometer, how it's going to be utilized. So if you go into your DSP, so on the left you have, that's a radius EX in this example, you go to unit properties, then configure external control inputs, and then you have in this device your inputs around the top. So they vary per device, but you want to make sure that you select pot as the use of that external control input, as opposed to dual switch closure down below. Once you've done that, you can now go to the volume, in this case, the channel 1 volume. You right click on the fader, go to set up a remote control. But you'll notice that in this case, we need to select something else. So we're not going to the menu to add an ARC, because it is an ARC, but it's an analog ARC. We call it the RC. So you'll notice the local analog input. That is what we need to choose on that device. In this case, again, it's the radius EX. So that is going to be the control arm right there. And then once you select that option, you can see down below, select analog control. And in our case, we want to leave it on pot. Of course, we can go ahead and select pot number 2, pot number 3, pot number 4, but they're not configured. So we're just going to keep with pot number 3. And once you've selected that, you'll notice that instead of a controller ID, we now have pot 1 hovering above the control, or the fader in this case. So now I wanted to mention that you can also set a switch, an actual switch, at the same time if you so choose, but this is completely separate. Of course, this is not the RC3. So this is effectively the same as when you would do an emergency contact closure. So you'll be utilizing the switch functionality on that. But that, I'm sorry to say, is the end. So I hope everyone got what they needed out of this. I know that I went very quickly and I covered a lot of material, but there is a lot of things left. But that may be for another day. We can concentrate especially on the ARC 3. Now, do you guys have any questions? I'm open to questions now. So if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and close this webinar and thank everyone for watching. Again, my name is Stu Paterson. I'm a technical sales engineer here at Symetrix. And if anyone has any questions that they think of later on, or if there's just more confusion that you haven't really done processing in your brain yet, go ahead and give us a call at 425-778-7728 extension 5, or you can go ahead and go to our website at www.symetrix.co and then do a search for whatever you're looking for. Okay, on there's a question. Is there going to be a webinar on W series controls? Yes, there is. I do not have the schedule in front of me, but there will be a W series control webinar here soon, I believe in the next couple of weeks. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I do know we have one planned. I just don't know when. Thursday, there you go. Somebody's paying attention to the schedule. So that's going to be presented by Tony. So, all right. So with that, I'm going to let everyone go and have a fantastic day. So take care.